Welcome to this episode in the lab. I am your host, Coach Jesse Grund. I want to talk a little bit today about injury prevention, or that moniker, that saying that we hear a lot in regards to how we're going to train. We're going to train for injury prevention. If you listen to our episode this week with Charlie Weingroff, we talked a little bit about how that is a false narrative, that there is no such thing as injury prevention. Injuries can't be prevented. So in today's episode, I want to talk a little bit about why that's a false narrative, how injuries actually occur, breaking them down to just their baseline elements. There's really two major types of injury, okay? And then by the end, I want to talk about the top 5 ways I help my clients stay resilient when it comes to injury mitigation or maintenance. So let's talk about what an injury is. In simplest terms, an injury is when the load exceeds the capacity of your body to handle that load. Now, I stole that from Dr. Andrea Spina in Functional Range Conditioning. Shout out to him and their team, amazing there. And they're on the forefront of this, working with many different sports, both associations, leagues, coaches, athletes, to help with this. But the concept then becomes when the load is greater, when it's a greater load than what the tissue, the joint, the bioflow can handle, then injury occurs. Now, we typically see that occur 2 ways. One is a very large load all at once and fast, and then a very low load over time in the wrong place over and over again. The way I like to describe that to people is look at it 2 ways. Look at a waterfall versus a trickle from an open faucet. So when we're looking at those two, we want to look at, okay, so a waterfall comes down 30 feet, boom, into the rocks, right? Let's say we got the same 4 rocks. Now I take those 4 rocks, I take them under the faucet, okay, say a separate time. I put them under the faucet, and I let that drip happen slow over time in the same place 10 years. Both sets of rocks are going to end up damaged. The damage is going to be different, but it's still going to be damage. And that's how we see it occur in our body. Our body is either overloaded all at once with heavy amounts of load or too much velocity, or over time from dysfunctional accommodations in our human movement system into tissue that can't handle it, then it eventually breaks down. And when we're looking at injury, it's really important to look at those 2 types because they are completely different, and why we talk about that there is no such thing as injury prevention, but only injury mitigation or training to be resilient. So if you have a coach who says, hey, we're going to do some injury prevention training, there is no such thing. And either they're using the wrong terminology or they're leading you down a path that is incorrect and not scientific. Because let's be honest, injuries are going to happen. Your training should try to mitigate the extremes at which they happen, or try to minimize that slow drip in the wrong place and fix the faucet. So when we look at athletes, we know that the environments that are faster and that there's more contact, those are going to be the environments where injuries are more likely to occur. And so it's our job as professionals and coaches to try and prepare those athletes for the different velocities, the changes of direction, and the loads at which they'll see so that they can stay resilient. For normal everyday people, there are just going to be times when things occur and injuries happen, and it becomes our job as coaches to give people as much capacity in their body as possible so that when injuries do happen, they aren't as debilitating. I can't stop a car accident from occurring. What I can do is I can prepare that body so that it is more resilient, it is stronger, it is more mobile, so that when like a knee goes out, maybe the hip still works really well because we've trained it. or one section of the spine gets damaged, I've trained the other sections so that they can still do their job. And that's how injury mitigation, that's how we start to get into resilience training, which I love. I love that moniker. So here are my top 5 ways I describe to people how to stay resilient. 1, joint training. So you have to look at the body, the skeleton, and understand that we are joints and tissue that is all together and a nervous system that sends signals, and then you do things. The more access to my joints and control that I have, the more ranges of motion I can control. That means when I face different inputs in life in different positions, I can get there without having to accommodate my body to get there. Those awkward, weird, transverse positions, if I haven't trained those, I have no control over those positions. So when somebody says, oh, I twisted this way and I hurt my back. Well, have you actually trained twisting or rotation in your body, in your hips, in your spine? Because if you haven't trained it, don't expect to have it when you need it. So our joints all have ranges associated with them, just baseline ranges we need. So doing something like CARs every day, controlled articular rotations, will help you have more control over your joints, over your body, sending a signal from the brain to that space. This is the joint, this is what it can do, and then being able to use it throughout that day. We can make those ranges greater and we can work on those things, but we want them to do their individual jobs so that when they're put together in a chain reaction of force, that no one thing has to make up for anything else. The whole is the sum of its parts. However, when one part doesn't do its job and the other parts have to do jobs they're not designed for, that's when we start to get these breakdowns that occur over time. So take care of your joint health. 2, train at different velocities. Where I see most people miss in their training is that injuries occur in velocities that we don't typically train in. Stepping off the curb and losing my balance, twisting my ankle. Well, have I done any training in my environment that reflects that velocity where I have to catch and stabilize myself? Have I done any depth jumps? Have I done anything from a plyometric perspective, side to side, where I'd have to learn how to catch myself? If my system doesn't know how to do it and it hasn't trained it, then again, I'm not going to expect to have it when I need it. We don't rise to the level of our expectation. We always fall to the level of our training. And that is such an important thing to remember. So changing velocities of basic exercises like your squat. So going from a normal squat to working slower to working faster so that I can train the tissue to react in my brain and my peripheral nervous system to react to those motions and actually start to expose it under velocity what it does. Because if all I do is train slow all the time, then my body is really going to only understand how to act slowly. And that's a really important part. 3, strength training needs to be a big part of your life. Don't expect to be resilient if you're not training to be strong. And this is a very important thing. So when I say training to be strong, we should be pushing loads that are heavier. We should be working towards elements of failure within SMART, periodization. Regardless of where you're at in your training age, we should be putting inputs on how well we can both move and then what loads we can move. When you're first starting, we're just creating this baseline. But after that, once you understand how to move and do things, we need to train to get stronger and not worry about, is this going to make me bulky? Every body is going to respond differently to the different things that you do in the gym. And there are multiple different ways to train in here. There's different modalities. There's different coaches that can lead you towards being strong. But if you're not training to be strong, expect to break. West Side Barbell, very famous saying, weak things break. So we want to have strength training as a big part of our lives. Minimum 2 times a week, Ideally, 3 to 4 days a week of strength training with inputs that get us stronger, and we're adding in those other things, that joint health and the different velocities. 4, your nutrition is so important to your overall resilience because you have to think of the integrity of the tissue. You have to consider the fact that if you don't get enough protein in your diet, you're not going to be able to build the lean mass that's going to support you. If your calcium's not high enough, it's going to let your bones be weaker. So nutrition becomes this really important part of staying resilient. We have to manage our nutrition and see how it affects our musculoskeletal system. This is why we see things like collagen as a protein source to then help make us more resilient, to strengthen the tendons. Why we encourage people, especially those who have inadequacies in their nutrition, to take in calcium and calcium-rich foods to strengthen their bones. And why we put such an emphasis on protein as we age, because of the fact that as lean muscle mass, we lose it, it becomes harder for our body to break down proteins, and so we need to eat more of it as a result. These all affect my resilience, because remember, resilience isn't just training. That's the seed. The soil is our body, and we have to make sure that it's able to do all the things that we return to it. And that helps me finish number 5. Respect your recovery. Recovery days are important. Managing your nervous system is important. Sleep is important. We tend to see people in a more fatigued state from a lack of recovery and a lack of sleep are more likely to get injured than the people who are well recovered and sleep enough. So manage your sleep, manage your recovery time. Give yourself time between hard workouts for the body to recover. Take those days off. Go for walks with your family. Go for bike rides, swim, do cold water immersion, go do some sauna time, do some breath work, but respect recovery, because a recovered system is a system that functions better, and a system that functions better is going to be able to fire better whenever we need it. So remember, guys and girls, there is no such thing as injury prevention. There is only injury mitigation or resilience training, and we can use the training in here to make us more resilient. But when we do get injured, understand that it is a small season of our life. It is a small season of our training, and to treat it as such. And understand that if my right leg's injured, my left leg's not, my core's not, my heart's not, my arms are not. And to find ways to train those things so that we don't let the whole system go to waste when we do get injured. But use these 5 tips to help start to stimulate the way you start staying resilient for your sports and for life. And I guarantee you, you will see a difference.